Hi, and welcome to Flute Topics, an interview program covering all things flute. I'm Helen of Helen's Willow Wind, and on occasion will be joined by my parrot. I am thrilled today to have Jan Michael Looking Wolf as my guest. Hi, Jan.
Hey Helen, thanks for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you here. It's so nice to just kick back and have a chat. We'd love to hear about how you came to the flute, what the flute meant to you, means to you, standing elk. I mean, there's so many facets that I'd love to have you share with us.
That's awesome. I appreciate you having me on your show. I think that before I answer your question, our community needs more connectivity. And that's what a lot of my works, like a portion of my work, is about how to connect people,
Mhm.
because it's through that connection that we can support them to rise up in their own greatness, right?
Mhm.
So our Native American Style Flute community needs more support, more connectivity. We have a lot of people that make videos. We have a lot of people that record albums. We have a lot of people that perform. I mean, a lot. But we need this. So in my tribal language, Hayumasi, for what you're doing, because what you're doing is you're providing this beautiful connectivity and this beautiful support for our genre. That's what we need. And it's worthy because we have players from all over Mother Earth. So what you're doing is beautiful. Keep it up. I encourage people, if you're listening and Helen asks you to attend the show, support the show because I think it's important. Um, so for me, I got started playing my flute after I had a stroke and I was a paraplegic for a year of my life. I have a genetic enzyme disorder that only Native Americans have, and some uh, Pacific Islanders have. It's very, very rare. I'm missing the enzymes that prevent your body from over blood clotting. And it's a very rare disorder. So they didn't know a lot about it back when mine went active in 1994. I was 27 years old. I had a 2-month-old baby, and all of a sudden I had two strokes and I died and I was a paraplegic. I was in the hospital and my body just filled up with blood clots. They tested me and they were like, hey, this guy's half Native American, he's half Anglo, and he has this disorder. And so I'm on a massive amount of blood thinners the rest of my life. I have been for a long time, managed them very healthy. But I also have titanium screens in my body called vena cava filters that I walk around with, and they prevent my body from throwing blood clots up from my lower extremities up into my heart and lungs. So I live with this disorder, but it was through that tragedy, you guess some people can call it, because it was a very hard period. We lost everything. We became impoverished, and here we were, my wife and I, planning this family, had this baby, and we became homeless for a short period of time. I was paraplegic, and that brought me back to the reservation to asking for help. My doctor bills alone were about $750,000, my hospital bill. And so my tribe helped, they paid for that, and I came home to the tribe and we went from there. And it was in that setting, back with my tribe, um, participating in many, many different healing practices, many different, mostly tribal, but also other types of healing practices, that I discovered that there was a correlation between musical self-expression and personal healing. And basically, musical self-expression is part of our existence. In the contemporary realm, we in our modern era, people say, "Are you a singer?" No, I don't sing very well. Do you play an instrument? No. But indigenous people, they all express themselves musically. It's a part of their daily medicine. It's a part of how they live. And the thing is all people of all places, of all colors across Mother Earth, all of us come from an indigenous person, if you go back far enough. People don't think that way. Well, I'm not Native American, I'm European. Well, where did the Europeans come from? I don't think they came from Saturn. So we all come from an indigenous person. And all indigenous people of Mother Earth founded their expression on a thing called oral tradition, which is expressing yourself without a written language, which includes dance and stories and body language and music. Oral tradition was the basis of their existence, and it's how they built all of their cultures off of it. All of us. So all of us have an ancestor inside of us that wants to express themselves musically. So for me, when I moved back to the reservation and I was exploring the relationships of expression to personal healing, I found it very strong in music. And my first early music in that place and time, as I was getting better, and my healing came slowly. It took about a year. I was in a wheelchair, and I was a paraplegic. And the prognosis was I would never walk again. The prognosis was I would never use my hand again. And as we have this conversation, what people don't know about me and what I've never told anybody publicly, I'm still about 15% paralyzed in my left hand. I still have brain damage from the stroke in 1994. So that's, I like the flute, but my fingers will freeze up every now and then, right? So I have to go through a process. But for me, when I played the flute, I was on my reservation. I was already drumming, singing, dancing, doing sweat lodges, practicing my culture, other things, both intertribal culture, like I say sweats and like powwow and things like that. But I was immersed on my reservation just with my family and safe and getting well. And it was then that my wife, Rhonda, actually found my first flute, and it was a high spirit flute. And we used to go to this shop to get different things. They had Knick-Knick, right, to make our pipe tobacco and things like that. And we would go in there, and they had a flute there. And one day, I was already walking around, moving around. I'd been on my res probably for 3 years before this happened, and I go, "What is that?" Because I was never really a big fan of the flute, because I don't come from a flute tribe. We have bone whistles and stuff that we hunt with. We don't have flutes. I'm here in the Northwest. We have different types of flutes. They're more like whistles. So they're like, "Oh, that's a Native American flute." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And she handed it to me, and she goes, "Try it." And I just started playing it. And I had, from the moment I played that note, I felt that healing connection. And I felt the connection between my own voice and what was coming out that flute. And she goes, "You play really well. How long have you been playing?" And I'm like, I don't play. So it was like $129. We didn't have the money. So I put the flute back, and it was no big deal to me. It was just like, it was because I have had that feeling in many other applications, drumming and dancing and singing and whatever. And I was trying to learn how to play the guitar again with a paralyzed hand, and I did, but I'm not even half the guitar player I was before the stroke, but I got some of it back. And we went back in there again a couple months later, and they had more of those flutes, but that same one was still there. And I'll never forget, it was a G minor, high spirit G minor flute. I picked it up and I started playing it. And this time I just kind of, Rhonda was looking around, just kind of kept playing it. And the lady comes over and she goes, "You have to have that flute." And I go, "We can't spend the money." And Rhonda's like, "I'm getting you that flute." And so she sold it to us for like half off.
Oh.
And I brought the flute back to the reservation. And then I had a cousin who had just got out of rehab. And part of his rehab at this Native American Rehabilitation Center was they taught them how to play the flute. Interesting, isn't it? So he went to rehab, and part of their journey of wellness was to learn how to express themselves musically. So he brings over his flute and starts teaching me how to play, because I didn't even know finger placement. I had that little book that came with it, and I just took off. And then my uncle, one of my uncles who's no longer with us, had bought my cousin the Nakai book, which is really technical, and it's a lot about Nakai tablature and music notation, but Nakai's book. And my cousin would never read it. So my uncle brought it over to me and said, "Hey," he said, "Don, your cousin won't read this book. You read it." So I read it, and that's when I really started understanding the flute. And it was like a combination of things. And then from there, I remember the first time I ever performed the flute, or shared it with a excuse me, with a crowd that was larger than just a couple people, because I had played it, for naturally, what we do for a few people here and there. And I'd only been playing for a short period, and I learned a Cherokee song, a peace song, and people in my tribe were really contentious. There was some disagreements, and I went down to the tribal meeting. There was like over 100 people there, and I asked the chair if I could play a song, and I took my flute with me, and my son, who's in the other room, he's visiting right now with his mom. But my son, my little son, he was like 6 years old, 7, and then my brother, who was like 12. Brother played the drums, son played rattle, and I had that flute, and I went up to play for people. And when I went up to play for them, I was just like, just remember, I looked out and my hands just started shaking, and I gripped I had like a death grip on the flute, and I was just like, it was bad. I mean, I was squeaking notes left and right, and my brother was like playing the drum, looking at me going, this is not what we did. My son's just like looking down at the ground going, this sucks, right? And I'm just like, I'm trying to grab the notes, and I wish I could tell you that story. And then I got it together. I never got it together. I never played the song right, but nobody knew. They were all looking, because my reservation, not many people had ever heard the flute live before. They were like, what is going on? So then I had another teacher, and she's currently our tribal chairwoman, Cheryl Kennedy. Amazing leader. Man, she's amazing by any measure, not just Indigenous leader. She's incredible. But her husband, Vernon Kennedy, who also was Paiute Tribal Council, had played the flute for many years, and he was in our community. So when I started playing the flute, my cousin was playing the flute. All of a sudden, Vernon comes out with his flute. He starts teaching me things. I'm like, whoa. And then it was only about 6 months, and I wanted to record an album. So I called up High Spirits. This was in the early 2000s, and I was like, way early 2000s. I said, hey, I would like to speak to Odell Borg. And he goes, this is Odell. He just like answered the phone back then. Right now, I don't think that happens, right? I'm like, yeah, I got one of your flutes. And I started telling him what I was doing. And I was like telling him about how I had a stroke. I was like talking too much. I'm like, I was a paraplegic, man. And now I'm playing this flute. And he was like, well, let me help you. And he actually sent me like 4 flutes for free, because I did not have any money. And he goes, and then I just kind of fell in love with him. He's just such a great man. And I started working towards my first album. And then I ended up getting flutes from JP Gomez, flutes from Stellar, Jeff, the Oregon Flute Store. And I had to pay for some of those, and this is back when flutes were a lot less expensive than they are now, right? And I had a bundle of flutes, and I wanted to record an album, and I didn't know how to do it. And my dad actually lent me the money to buy a little digital recorder to record my first album on. And I did. And it took me forever. And my uncle Standing Oak and I would be up till 3 a.m. trying to figure these things out. And to record a little album took me 2 months. I remember I was almost done with it, and then I pushed a button, I erased everything, and it was all gone. It was like one of those things. So we finally get through it. And this is a really funny story. So, and meanwhile, you got to remember, it's not just about recording an album. I'm still playing my flutes like everyone else. That's the one thing about this story that I think is helpful, is that people like to we human beings, right? Because like I mentioned earlier, we are all part of oral tradition, and we're all from an indigenous ancestor. All of us come from that. And all people of the earth are created to make opinions based on information that we have. That's why we stereotype. That's why we generalize. We can't stop it. Even those of us who are aware, what's a daily practice? Wait a second, we have to check ourselves. So back then, here I was getting ready to record this album, let me back up. So I actually had recorded the album, And and my wife looked at what I was doing. She thought it was ridiculous because we didn't have much money. We had an old computer, and so I had the tracks, but I didn't know how to put them on an album. So I went up to Walmart and I bought like those little uh print it yourself on a disc, you know? And I was sitting there burning these discs and I made like 30 of them. And my wife was pretty critical of it. She wasn't a believer at that point, you know. I don't think I could even play that well and all of that. And then there was a knock on the door. And he goes, one of the tribal guys was like, I heard that you made a flute album. I'd like to buy one. And all it took was I sold one album and my wife was on the team. All of a sudden, she was like printing them off, and we like ruined our printer and our computer. We had like printed off like 300, you know, the printer at the end was like, and the stuff was coming out. We kept going up to Walmart and buying those things and putting them together and selling them. I literally sold 400 CDs doing it that way myself over a period of months at like $15 a CD. Made a lot of money, took that, reinvested it, right? And then a short time later, I just started getting collaborations and little indie record labels, and that's my story. But what I was going to say about generalization, and now I'm back on track, is the observation is what we like to do a lot, even in our own industry, as aware as we are. We like to say, they're a recording artist. They're a teacher. Oh, they're really spiritual with their flute. Or they're a traditional native with their flute. But the fact is we're all those things. Even if you're a recording artist, you still love your flute. That's why you're a recording artist. So yeah, I recorded a lot of albums and I've done a lot of things. But right before this show, Helen and I were talking about these new flutes that I got and how excited I am. And I was showing her notes. I'm just like you, recording artists. You got to remember that. We're just human beings. And we like to also say, oh, they play really well. Oh, and look at this. And you know, the thing is everybody's expressions are beautiful. And that's what I've learned. And if you go down to the root of it, the reason why we all like this so much is because music is healing. And expressing our feelings with notes is a language that we can all speak and understand. And it breaks down these barriers and it crushes stereotypes and it makes connections. And that's why I said that this show is important. So, probably not your usual guest, but that's how I got started playing the flute. And all of that is still, I haven't changed. Like, all of that are the same reasons why I play today. Now, I did go through some times where, you know, my ego was a little out of control in the late 2000s because I had started winning awards and started, you know, when I won Artist of the Year at the Native American Music Awards, and I started thinking, I started believing, you know, that I was something special, that, you know, that I, you know, and then afterwards, you know, you go through these cycles and you start realizing that, no, I'm just a player like everybody else, you know. Awards don't make you any different. So
They do feel good. And you have won some awards that nobody else has. And that is impressive. And we all see you where you are now. To get this backstory about you and, you know, pushing the erase button, I know that's something I would do or whatever. But we all, we didn't see that side of you and how you got to be who you are, playing the music that you do and sharing and educating the rest of us and in inspiring us, not only from what you're doing, but inspiring us through talking to us like you have with me, about where I am and what I'm doing in the journey that I'm on and sharing the excitement of it. Like you just, your stories, I just want to sit here and, you know, forgive me everyone, I'm still giggling inside about you making all these recordings and your lovely wife getting on board. I mean, I just think that's marvelous.
and I remember I have another story in those early days, and I guess that's what we'll talk about. So I had made a few recordings, and I was on a good path of just being really busy with the flute. And I started becoming established in the Northwest. I started emerging, right? And but I still, This was before the internet was, this is before the internet really had the infrastructure for our Native American style flute community. There wasn't a lot on the web, right? This was in the early 2000s. So I remember I started becoming fairly known. I opened up for a man named Charles Littleleaf, which if you don't know Charles Littleleaf, you need to look him up. Amazing, masterful player and maker, beautiful person. And I opened up for him. I opened up for Mary Youngblood. But I didn't really know who was who in the flute world. I was kind of isolated up in the Northwest, and I was just really focused on making my own music. And I was so busy playing because in the early 2000s, it wasn't inundated with a whole bunch of stuff you could find online. So if you heard there was a Native American style flute player at a gallery, people would run down to that gallery to hear it. Things were different then, right? So matter of fact, I was the first Native American flute player to have a CD on CD Baby. I was the first one. There was no Native American flute on CD Baby. Think about that. I was one of the first ones on iTunes other than Carlos and the big record labels. So here we were in that setting. There wasn't all this connectivity through the web and all these different groups and things like that. And there was a couple out there. NASFA was out there. They were doing a good job. But you had a lot of people who weren't really on the internet a lot yet. So I didn't know who all the players were. And one day I'm at the tribal offices, right, working my day job. And somebody comes up and they go, there's a guy down in the parking lot. He's a flute player and he wants to meet you. He heard about you and he drove an hour out of his way to meet you. Because he heard about all the things you're doing with the flute here in the Northwest and he's excited to meet you. And I'm busy. I'm having a busy day. I'm at the office and I'm like, okay, go ahead and send him in. So he comes in and I'll never forget, like a big bandana, silver hair in a really long braid, and kind of a modest stature of a gentleman. I'm 6'3", so he's much smaller than me. And he comes in and he goes, John Michael, so good I've heard about the things you're doing with the flute. I'm a flute player. And he's talking to me and I'm going, oh. And he's like, my name's Kevin. And I'm like, good to meet you, Kevin. I go, yeah, I have a few minutes. So we just kind of talked and I was really cocky. I'm like, yeah, I got a gig tonight. All my stuff's in the van. And, because I was playing everywhere I could. I would play for a bowl of soup somewhere. I wouldn't care. I was playing everywhere. So he starts telling me he's playing this big college about an hour away. And he goes, I have some flutes that are a couple 100 years old in my car if you want to see them. So I go down there and he opens up this old box and he takes out these old flutes and he lets me play them. And I'm like playing these flutes going, and I'm thinking, who is this guy? So he asked me if I would go to his show that next night. And I remember I had another thing and I said, no, I'm sorry. But and he gave me his CD and I gave him one of mine and I looked and it was Kevin Locke. It was Kevin Locke, like one of the most epic, of the Renaissance of the flute to help bring it back to the world. And I just went, you're Kevin Locke? I didn't know who you were. And he laughed. And then after that, we became really good friends. And we stayed in touch distantly over all these years. And I was kind of speechless. And then he drove off. And then I called him on the phone like a couple weeks later. I did not know that was you. And really humble guy. But that was Kevin Locke. So, it's just interesting the way it works. So I know what it's like when when you meet somebody who's established and you think they're, but literally everybody I've met, and I met most everybody in the industry, they're all just human beings, and most of them are very modest and humble and helpful. And Kevin's one of those people for sure. If you ever have a chance to see him or learn from him, I recommend it. So that's a story. But
you certainly have stories.
Yeah, here's the thing, Helen, is I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of stories, so we better be careful. But or people would be like, it's boring, right?
Oh, these aren't boring. These are not boring stories. I'll vouch for everybody who's listening out there.
So the thing is this, though, is if we can talk a little bit, I'll share some of what I've learned as an educator,
Thank you. Yeah.
passing along some stuff. So for our players who are watching this show, Helen before the show asked me to think of a few things tips I can offer you. First tip is always play what you know. Don't worry about what you don't know. Play the technique that you are comfortable with when you play your flute. Let the new technique become comfortable in a different setting where you're trying to gain that technique. But when you express yourself inside of your comfort zone. And then what you'll find, and what I'm sure you have already experienced, is, oh, I just did something that I've never done before. Now, when that happens, don't get sidetracked. Just focus on your feelings and playing what you know. Second thing, be aware of playing in tune and playing cleanly. Don't worry about being fancy. Don't worry about playing your flutes to impress somebody else or the latest thing or to play like somebody you admire. Keep it simple. Breathe when you need to, control your flow and relax into it, and you will play beautifully. You don't need to know a lot of technique to play beautifully. It doesn't require that. And I say those two things because a lot of times we go to flute circles and we're striving, and it's good to strive and to learn new things and to learn technique. It's good to get a teacher. You should have a teacher, and you should do that. But while you're in that process, when it's time to express yourself, relax, play what you know, aim to play in tune and cleanly. And then the last thing I'll tell you, the third thing is when that doesn't happen, when you're playing and it goes sideways, move right on to that next note and go back to the other two, right? Oh, I derailed. I played a bad note. Go right back to getting in your comfort zone, listening to yourself, and focusing on your transitions to play cleanly. Too often people do not play their transitions. They don't play their notes as they move their fingers. They play the note, they think about their next note, but they don't think about how they're going to get there. So those things will really help your journey. And there's a lot after that, but I think I'll leave it there as far as my hint for you. My tip would be that for sure.
Well, I've been blessed to be working with you and also taking your workshops online, and you have great tutorial videos on your website that I think everybody should look at because they're just marvelous to sit there, digest them, follow them, come back to them a day later, and they're just wonderfully done. And I don't know where I would be without you, Jan Michael.
Oh, that's nice. I actually am, and I think people know this about me. It's been a very long process. I've been a full-time Native American flute instructor at a university for accredited courses now for 17 years.
Mhm.
And I have about 14 to 1,500 students a year that learn how to play the flute in that setting. And over the last several years, that has gotten bigger. It wasn't always that big. When I started, it was like a very small, it was an experiment. And then we wrote curriculum and had it audited and went and worked with other professors. And now it's quite developed. And so for me, my journey is becoming more and more of a teacher, even outside the university, and less of a performing artist. I feel like I've done a lot performing. I played over 700 venues.
Wow.
And you can just Google my name and see tons of music videos and concerts. And I'm still going to do some of that stuff, of course, but it's in a different context. Now I feel like my primary purpose is to pass along the knowledge that I've been so grateful to obtain through those 700 performances, through those 25 CDs, through teaching over 17,000 people how to play the instrument personally.
Mhm.
And from all of that, I put together the ebook on my website, and we have video lessons. And I'm currently working on a second ebook. And I cannot wait to publish that, hopefully January. It's more like an e-course.
Mhm.
So I feel like right now that's my purpose. And if you look at our lives, our purpose is never just the same, right? I think the wisdom is connecting with that at any point in time and realizing where you're supposed to be, like where it's not supposed to be or not supposed to be, but where you can best serve others and best serve yourself and best connect to your purpose. And that changes, and it changes through life, you know. Hey, when you're a parent, you're a mother, you're a father, that's it. There's your purpose, right? That's the main, and that's always there now, you're right, your whole life. But as your children get older and they leave the house, you kind of, the dynamic changes. Well, for me as a performing artist, it's now changed a bit, where I still love performing, but I really don't think you're going to find me at too many live venues. I think that I'm going to be sharing my medicine in a different context with my students in World Flute Circle and all of that stuff. So there's a couple that I really like to do. And then, you know, I still play ceremony for the tribe when they need it. I still do that. So, but there was a day when that was like my primary thing. I really wanted to perform. Give me a stage, give me a stage, give me a stage, you know. And now it's more like, give me a classroom, give me a classroom, give me a classroom, you know. How can I share this? I have apprentices, and Helen's one of them. I'm very honored that she works with me. And my goal when I work with apprentices is to help them fill their own space, help them reach their own potential, help them find their own mastery. And I'm there to help them do that. It isn't to make a cookie cutter of me, because that wouldn't be right. But I do that. I have a apprentice program. As Helen mentioned, I have the videos and the ebook, and it's all about sharing the gift. Yeah.
And the World Flute Circle that you've founded is a wonderful font of information. And you're talking about the connectivity, the friendships that I have made there, and I haven't seen them live face to face. I've Zoom chatted with a lot of them, deep relationships, and I will see them when COVID opens. I don't know where they are in the world. I know I will meet some of these
Right.
people, and it's a beautiful thing.
It is.
And you
And
take this whole journey one step at a time. Like, you wanted to record, so you figured out how to do it, and that led to another process with it. And you can't just go out on the stage and play like you do. You have to take these little steps, and everything leads to something.
everything leads to something, and everybody's different. Like, I've had apprentices that have worked with me, like Robin Gentlewolf, who wanted to be a recording artist, and she didn't even know how to play the flute when I met her. And that's what she did. I've had other apprentices that have been Buddhist monks who wanted to put their chant in a Native American flute to honor the Native American people. And I did that. And he was over 70 years old, this man. I worked with him. So everybody goes into a different way. They have a different journey. But like you said, there's steps in each journey to move along, right? So it's really interesting. You don't just wake up one day and just all of a sudden, you know, like, have all this technique and all this. But let me tell you, from somebody who's done a lot of these things, um, if you're looking for the blessing and you're looking for the love and you're looking for the healing, it's never in the next thing you're going to do. It's in the thing you're doing. It's in the note you're playing. It's in the song that you know how to play. That's where it is. It's never in the thing you're going to do. It's never in the bigger thing. That's like trying to fill a hole that we can never fill in our heart, right? But when we realize that we can just really love ourselves and love where we are and love how we play our flutes and love all the things about us, strengths and weaknesses, and be honest about that and look at that reflection and then enjoy being there, that is the harmony that I wish everyone, when I always say, may you always walk in beauty. May you always live in peace, and may we all play together in harmony. That's the harmony. We have to have harmony with ourselves before we can have harmony with each other. So I think we're about done with our interview or
Yes.
whatever.
And
I'll
Michael,
come back.
a pleasure chatting with you. You went a little more in depth with some stories that we had skirted around over time, and they were just fantastic. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. And, I'll come back. I mean, I'll find time for this. And I love your show. You keep doing what you're doing. Helen, you keep doing what you're doing. You're on the same path. You're trying to lift people up, trying to strengthen our community. And just one last announcement, I guess I'll make, is that Robin Gentlewolf is the executive director for the Native American Style Flute Awards. And I'm the founder of that organization. And even though we had to pull back a little bit because of COVID, we're still moving forward with a program that November 1st, the entries open up for the healing flute category. No fee to enter, no cost. If you go to NASFAhonors.com, the instructions on how to enter are there. You simply send an email, and you can submit yourself or you can submit someone else as long as you have their approval. Basically, it's for Native American style flute players that have done something like this show during COVID, or that have made a video and posted online during COVID, or have encouraged others during this pandemic with their flute. And I just saw the digital honor badge, and it's lavender. It's beautiful. So those entries are opening up on the 1st of November. And then we had a few special awards, and there'll be more about that coming out too. So in 2021, it's going to be that. And then summer of 2021, I'm going to present the Founders Award to somebody. We have a very special award that's going to go to someone who is really dynamic and really out there making a positive change with their flute. And then the following year, we'll have the full award program. But right now, that's what we have. So.
Well, bless you, Jan Michael, for all you're doing. And I know for myself and the other friends that I've made on here, we all share a passion that it's like a fire in the belly when it comes to the flute in this community. And I just want to thank you for your guiding me and also opening the path for all of us to express ourselves with the flute.
And
So,
I look forward to working with you, Helen. Listen, for those of you listening, you're going to hear more from her because she's working on these things, and it's beautiful. So I look forward to jumping back in on that with you very soon. Thank you, everybody. In the language from the land where I'm at, we always say kapai, which means hello and goodbye. We also say hayumasi, many thanks. And just, keep enjoying that, the words I shared from the heart today, love yourself and love the note that you play. Love that note. That's my advice. Take care.
And I look forward to seeing everybody on the next Flute Topics. And until then, happy fluting, everybody. Bye-bye.